Corruption in government is often blamed for South Africa's faltering economy, but big business is also siphoning off billions through tax avoidance. The cheek of it, considering how outspoken they are on government corruption. Research by SA Tide, a joint project of the National Treasury and international policymakers, has made damning findings about the richest of the rich skimming off economies around the world. Multinational companies are accused of tax avoidance through profit shifting. And this happens when firms move taxable income from high tax jurisdictions to their companies in countries with lower tax rates. They also use transfer mispricing. A multinational over or undercharges its branch in another country to affect tax. The study says South Africa loses around 7 billion rand a year due to profit shifting. Tonight we speak to Ludvig Wier on Skype from Copenhagen about his research into tax avoidance by big business. We also have corporate governance consultant Peter Goss in our Johannesburg studio with me, and Tim Mertens, chairperson of Sovereign Trust SA Limited in Cape Town, to respond to the findings. Welcome, all three of you. Ludvig Wier, tell us more about what you discovered and the extent of this theft.
Well, thank you so much. And I think you already gave a really good introduction. So this is an ambitious research project together with the National Treasury, where we in short find that 7 billion rand each year shifted out of South Africa by multinational firms and to tax havens. And I think it's important to understand that this is a global issue. So I've done studies like this all over the world, and we see the same thing. And the main cause of the issue is really the current international tax law, which is fundamentally flawed. And before we fix this, this problem will keep existing.
And where does South Africa sit in this stable of tax evaders?
So I would say South Africa is in my view, the normal case of tax avoidance. What you're seeing there, even though it's these enormous numbers, is not anything worse than what we are observing in other OECD countries. So the issue is really what do we do from here? Not really ranking South Africa, how their performance compares to other countries. I think every country should find ways of mitigating this, and that is through international collaboration, and it's through using new algorithms and new approaches that technology has brought us to the tax burden.
Tim Mertens, what is the impact of this avoidance, and how are you seeing it?
Well, I think it's obviously if you look at the growth of tax avoidance over a long period of time, I think it can generate many billions in lost revenue for the fiscus onshore. But I think the point to make is that this is not an illegal activity. It's just an activity which has grown over time as multinational companies have exploited tax systems which really are behind the curve in terms of their development. With the digital economy developing as it has, domestic tax laws just haven't been able to keep pace. And so therefore, a unilateral approach is just never going to work. There must be a multinational approach, which has been taking place over the last couple of years through the OECD initiatives and the base erosion and profit shifting action plans that have been put into place.
You say there should be a multinational approach, but can there be one solution that fits all, considering how different countries and economies operate?
No, I don't believe so. But I think that what happens is that under the current situation with the BEPS action plans, what is happening is that there's got to be increased cooperation between countries, between tax authorities, sharing information, resolving disputes, and just making sure that domestic laws keep pace with the digital economy in particular, and that there is a global approach to the issue rather than only a national one, which will never really solve the problem.
No. I mean, Peter Goss, it's not illegal, it's naughty. Is it clever? Why would every company not do it if they could get away with it?
No reservations starts right there. So we, once again, for the corporate environment and big business, we find new fancy terms to describe illicit conduct. So in my opinion, tax avoidance is illicit conduct. Illicit conduct in the context of tax, more clinically speaking about it from a fraud perspective, is tax evasion. Tax avoidance is not tax evasion. So we hide somewhere between and betwixt the two. It's a very fine line between tax avoidance and tax evasion. And tax avoidance in our law is not illegal. That's how people get away with it. I think from a corporate governance perspective, what one has to look at as an organization is if you want to be a good corporate citizen, you've got to start looking at avoiding scams that allow you to avoid tax obligations for corporate social upliftment, for example. I mean, one of the things tax avoidance does is rob a developing economy
if
of
you
development.
think about it, 7 billion rand every single year. That could be so much better spent on, as you say, uplifting society.
I think the study looked at that in terms of entrepreneurship development. And I think you robbed other entrepreneurs of the opportunity to grow on account of your tax efficiency, let's call it, yes.
Ludvig, finding that, I mean, how much money could be going elsewhere, helping entrepreneurs, for example. How could that pressure be used, that sort of information, to make these multinationals behave better?
No, but I think it's a very good point. And just to emphasize what my study finds is that 98% of all of the profit shifting going out of South Africa can actually be traced down to 10% of multinational firms, which are the very, very largest. So what we're seeing is that this is really profit shifting. It's a tax credit that is only given to the very largest of firms. And that is, of course, a problem to competition, right? If you, as a very large firm, pay less of your profits in taxes than small firms do, well, then you'll be able to achieve greater returns on investments, and in that sense, you'll be able to outcompete your competitors. And I think, again, this is something that policymakers should be taking very seriously, and it's for sure something that we're taking very seriously in Europe. That's actually on those grounds that we're prosecuting firms such as Apple.
Okay, and who are these firms? Who's doing it? Who are the guilty ones?
So obviously the data that I've been working on is completely anonymized, right? So this is purely a research exercise, which is meant to give us an idea of the big picture here, and I think that's also the right approach. We should not be targeting individual firms.
But what about the industries? Are there specific industries who are better or worse here?
Yeah, so we are seeing, which you can read in the paper, we are seeing some interesting patterns in certain industries such as the extractive industry and the financial sector.
Okay, Tim Mertens, so where to from here? I mean, the government has said, the South African government, that this needs to be further investigated. Surely that's not enough.
Yeah, well, the Davis Tax Committee made certain recommendations and observations. We do have, obviously, laws in our Income Tax Act which deal with issues like transfer pricing, for example, control foreign company legislation, and there are various practice notes around transfer pricing, etc. But I think it's going to have to be, again, as I say, a multinational approach. And the South African government and the Treasury, along with bodies like the Davis Tax Committee, are going to have to work with colleagues overseas and other countries overseas. I think there are something like 116 countries now at the moment that are participating in this process, and really just to glean information and work together in order to try and curb the outflows. But it's not going to be a very easy task. And it's only something that I think will evolve over time and perhaps get better over time. Okay,
a quick reminder of the figures that we're talking about. 10% of top multinationals are linked to 98% of the 7 billion tax loss. 2% of foreign-owned firms' tax revenue is lost. Tax avoidance affects revenue collection globally, and there's a 50% drop in corporate tax rates in the last 40 years. I mean, that really is, it's quite staggering, isn't it? And you've got these multinationals pointing the finger at government. Do you think this is trying to cause some sort of smoke screen?
one needs to lift this up to the corporate governance landscape. So on the one hand, we say a multinational problem is part of the solution. I don't know that it's that simple. What we do have is a strong corporate governance dispensation for multinationals. And I think that's where we should find a solution for the short term. And therein lies a sub-area called governance functional areas, a governance functional area called tax governance. So mature tax governance focused on the corporate governance model or framework that an organization is following will help to a large extent remediate this risk. A board of directors will take an interest in how we're managing our tax and tax responsibilities maturely, as opposed to just making sure we pay as little tax as possible. Auditors should play a role in making sure they play the watchdog over appropriately disclosed income, and they aren't advising clients on how to avoid paying their taxes in an inappropriate jurisdiction, inappropriate being a high tax burdened jurisdiction, in giving them guidance on how to avoid taxes. Auditors are integral to helping organizations avoid taxes, believe me. I think that the Revenue Authority also needs to step in and enforce more of its avoidance or anti-avoidance regime insofar as tax avoidance is concerned.
I mean, Ludvig, when this sort of information comes out, it makes people, I mean, obviously I pay my taxes, but it makes people wonder why they should pay their taxes if those at the top are not. How do we get that money back?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, right? And I think there are things you can do unilaterally. So the first thing, the obvious thing, is you need to prioritize your tax authority, right? Simply add sufficient funds and manpower to your tax authority. I think that's an important point to make. Another point is that you can use these new algorithms, these new machine learning methods to actually go through all transactions that multinational firms do. So this is something that wasn't possible to do 10 years ago. Now we have the technology to really use modern software to go through all of the records of multinational firms. And then finally, you have to go to the international stage, which South Africa is already doing through the OECD network.
I wonder if you could give us a timeline to reaching this point. I mean, you'd have to get everybody on board, hadn't you?
So I don't think you are. I'm very certain that you don't need to get everybody on board. And I think that's one of the mistakes in the current framework that we are trying. For example, we have Ireland, the world's biggest tax haven, in the OECD network, and they are in a way obstructing the progress. So I think you need to accept that you don't get all countries into this collaboration, especially you have tax havens that benefit from obstructing progress. So you need to find a coalition of the willing and progress with those, and that is for sure possible, and that is also what is currently being discussed in the EU.
Tim, this sort of knowledge, does it damage a country? Is there reputational damage on these multinationals?
Well, I think so, because I mean, if you consider some of the big multinational companies like Google, Facebook, Starbucks, and others, and it was mentioned earlier that Ireland was a jurisdiction being used. I mean, certainly the UK government, the House of Lords, did a report which was very, very damning about the low amounts of tax that were being paid by those multinationals, or some of those multinationals, in places like Ireland, where artificial profits were being created in those jurisdictions like Ireland, and the real profits were not being taxed in the home jurisdiction. So I think it is very damning, and this was really brought to the fore 2 or 3 years ago. And I think now, certainly there have been amendments made. I understand that in Ireland, the likes of Google have been given until next year, 2020. And then after that, I'm not sure what the regime will be, but certainly they won't be paying the levels of tax that they're paying now in Ireland.
Okay, well, thank you, all of you, for helping us understand this better. Tim Mertens, Peter Goss, and Ludvig Wier. Thank you. Up next, how to develop your skills if you've lost out on a studying opportunity.